Hello, Cougars. It's time for my second video about the book, Fish Do the Strangest Things. In the first video, I read about the deep sea angler, the archer fish, the shark, the remora, and the lungfish. Today I have about 5 more fish that are just as strange as those. The first fish is called the king of the river. Most of the time, an alligator gar moves very slowly. He looks like an old log floating in the river, but he is one of the biggest freshwater fish in America. Gars may grow to be 12 feet long. Gars can live to be very old. It is not easy to kill a gar. A spear will bounce right off of him. Indians once used gar skin for armor, and they used gar scales for arrowheads. But a gar has more than his scales to keep him safe. He is a fierce fighter, and he can move quickly if he wants to. The gar may look something like an alligator, but he can kill an alligator with one bite of his mighty jaws. For millions of years, alligator gars have been the kings of the southern rivers, but they have never been known to attack a person in the water. So don't worry if that old floating log turns out to be a gar. The fish with whiskers. One of the strangest of the river fish is the catfish. Most catfish have 8 long feelers on their faces. The feelers make the catfish look as if he has whiskers. The feelers help a catfish find his food. He can taste with his feelers. He can taste with the rest of his body too. A catfish can even taste with his tail. The catfish tastes everything he touches. There cannot be many tastes the catfish does not like. Even garbage is fine food for the catfish. This is lucky for us. The catfish helps to keep our rivers clean. But there is a time when many male catfish do not eat a thing. This is when the eggs are laid by the mother catfish. The father takes the eggs into his mouth, but he does not swallow them. The father catfish keeps the eggs in his mouth until they hatch. Then he just spits out the baby catfish. But he does not leave the little ones. If he sees an enemy, he takes the babies right back into his mouth. Then one day, the father no longer knows his children. He would be glad to eat them himself. Somehow the young fat catfish know this. From then on, they will take care of themselves. There are more than 1,000 kinds of catfish. They are all strange. One of the strangest lives in Africa, and he is not at all like the others. Most catfish stay near the bottom of a river. Not this African catfish. He looks for his food at the top. He rolls over on his back and he swims along upside down. Because of this, he is called the upside down catfish. Can you think of a better name for him? Even other catfish might find this one strange. The Great Journey. The beautiful king salmon spends almost all his life on a journey. The journey is one of the longest and strangest in the world of fish. The journey begins in a little pool far from the sea. This is where the salmon are born. When the baby salmon are a few inches long, they leave their pool. They swim into a stream. The stream grows larger. Other streams join it. The streams become a river. The river is now full of thousands of small salmon. The river is taking them to the sea. It sweeps the salmon over rocks and waterfalls. It sweeps them along tail first. Some of the salmon may have to go 2,000 miles to reach the Pacific Ocean. That is a long way to go, tail first. Suddenly, the little fish are in the huge ocean. They will live here for about 3 years. They will swim hundreds and hundreds of miles. They may swim far away from land out into the deep Pacific. As they swim, they eat and eat. They grow bigger and bigger. They grow stronger and stronger. The hardest part of their journey is about to begin. Suddenly, the salmon stop eating. Somehow they know that it is time to go back to the same little pools they left so long ago. How can the salmon do this? Salmon have a wonderful sense of smell. They have wonderful memories too. They remember the smell of the water in the pools where they were born. They now must follow their noses back to their birthplace. It was easy for the young salmon to come down the rivers to the sea. The rivers just carried them, but now the salmon must go the other way. They must swim against the mighty rivers. They must leap up the waterfalls. They must fight against the waters of the rapids. They are beaten and bruised by the rocks and the rushing water. The salmon grow weak and tired, but at last most of them reach the pools where they were born. Now there is one more thing they must do. They are just strong enough to do it. The females lay their eggs. The salmon cover their eggs with sand, and then they die. But their work has been done. Soon their eggs will hatch. The river will again be full of young salmon on their way to the sea. Another great journey will begin. The Tide Riders. Every day the waters of the oceans rise and fall. When the tide is low, it is called low tide. When it is high, it is called high tide. Every 2 weeks there is a very high tide. There are little fish who seem to know all about the tides. They are called grunion. At night in the spring and summer, thousands of grunion swim up onto the California beaches. They swim up on the very high tide. The waves go out. The grunion are left on the beach. Right away, the female grunion start digging. They dig with their tails. Soon they are half buried in the soft, wet sand. Then they lay their eggs. They must do this before the next wave comes in. When the next wave comes in, the grunion wiggle down to it, and it takes them back to the sea. You see the fish on the bottom? The eggs stay in the sand for 2 weeks. Then the next very high tide washes over them. Out pop the baby grunion. The waves carry them out to sea. They will stay in the sea for a year. Then they will ride the tide back to the beaches to lay their own eggs. The Great Mystery. Eels are strange creatures. They look like snakes. They move like snakes, but they are fish. For thousands of years, eels had a secret. How were young eels born? Where were they born? Nobody knew. Nobody had ever seen an eel egg. Nobody had ever seen a baby eel. The secret of the eels was found out far from their freshwater homes. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, men had seen fish that looked like tiny glass leaves. 2 men caught a few of these fish and kept them in a tank of water. The men had a big surprise. The tiny fish turned into little eels. Now men knew that eels came from the sea, but how did they get there? A man named Johannes Schmidt wanted to find out. He asked ship's captains to help him out. The captains watched for the tiny glass fish. They caught many of them for Dr. Schmidt. For 17 years he studied them. At last he knew the secret of the eels. Female eels live most of their lives far from the sea. They live in ponds and rivers and streams. Some even live in wells. Then the time comes for them to lay their eggs. They swim down the rivers to the ocean. There the male eels are waiting for them. Together they swim out into the ocean. They swim and swim. At last they come to a place called Sargasso Sea. All the eels from Europe and America come there. And there, deep in the sea, they lay their eggs, and then they die. After a week, the eggs hatch. The baby eels now look like glass leaves. They look like the ones Dr. Schmidt studied. The baby American eels float and swim toward America. The baby European eels move toward Europe. No one knows how this can be. That is one secret the eels still keep to themselves. Before they reach the rivers, the little glass fish change into little eels. The females leave the males. The females find homes far from the ocean. Years go by. They grow strong and fat. Then one day, they start back down the rivers. They meet the waiting male eels. Together, they will make the long, long journey back to the Sargasso Sea. Well, that's all for the second video for Fish Do the Strangest Things. In the third video, we'll do the rest of the book, and there's about 6 more strange fish to learn about. Have a great day!